Hi, it's Kaz again. Just going back to you with a response to the new question that's coming, or the big one that seems to be going through probably 38 degrees. Thank you very much. Last week, the head of the British Medical Association warned that after the election, patients could be charged for basic NHS services. Will you commit to keeping the NHS free at the point of use? Now, there's NHS has got, I think, confusing issues around it. So one, you've got privatisation of, for example, the actual assets, the buildings, where effectively they privatise, the state owns them, but they've owned them as a loan, so it's privately owned. Otherwise the state could just stop paying it, and the interest rates on those are obscene. The deals mean that the NHS and your children have ended up paying multiples of what it would have cost were the state to have just literally built it themselves, or commissioned for a tender to having these things built. The private, buy now, pay later is something that young people might do when they're working, but you think of your government as like an old age pensioner. It's been around a while. We shouldn't be buying now, paying later in that regard. It's one thing to have a cash flow with your income and your outgoings. That's the whole. I understand why we have a deficit at all, but for me, a deficit should be equal at best to national tax take in a given year. It shouldn't be beyond that, or a debt rather, national debt. Anyway, regardless of that, so there's a few issues at hand here. So one is privatisation of the NHS. And where I say, for example, I have a vested interest. I work for a medical company that makes medical devices, medical equipment, respiratory connectors and things that go between the patient and the machine, and they're starting to make more bits of machines. So the question at that point is, does the state manufacture medical products? I don't think where it comes to innovation, the state does terribly well, but I don't think there's anything particularly innovative about building a building, or particularly innovative about managing a large number of people, which is what the staffing side of it is. So I'd like to see the NHS get rid of most of its locum staff requirements. They're reducing the number of staff that they have, and that doesn't reduce the number of staff they need, and therefore managers are constantly required to use these locum staff, where these locum staff contracts are going to people who have been influencing and funding those same people who made it so that the staffing levels would be lower. So that is hideous. But to actually reduce the number of staff we theoretically have to below what we need, and then constantly have a supply of locum staff at 3 times the cost is insane. But now when we come back down to the actual question, so I say that I do not like most forms of NHS privatisation. I think all of the buildings, all the staff should be national. Very interesting debate here regarding GPs, because GPs are actually privately employed or self-employed individuals. I think I probably would have been happier with GPs being employed as well. And then the other turn of the coin there is that people can sue GPs and the government, or theoretically can, and if you privatise out that part, you ring fence and protect maybe the greater whole from being sued about everything. So we've also got to sort out our legal suing structure partially. But in a nutshell, my personal belief and preference is to always vote against privatisation of NHS buildings, NHS staffing, keep those levels so we don't need to have any external suppliers, and that will be on my list. We will negotiate it at the time when we have our 20 residents of Wokingham deciding what we're going to go in what order. I suspect that the NHS and residents and myself will agree on this point. The point you actually asked about, I suspect myself and the local residents won't agree with. But as you know, my system is that I will always vote according to what the local residents have decided on these issues that we put down on our list. And I hope it ends up on the list. I hope it ends up in a different way. But I suspect it will end up on the list as you want it, or the people have asked me, which is, will you commit to keeping the NHS free at the point of use? I personally would like to see an initiation fee of about £10 for people going to a GP or whatnot, just to reduce the amount of use of it. When my children were small, every time somebody had the slightest snuffle, it was always everyone around you saying, I'd take them in, and you can't be too safe. And every time, once you know what you're doing with your small child, it's look, once you give them the Calpol, they settle down, they're okay. That means they're fine. It's if you give them the Calpol and there's other things going wrong that they're not. So normally you can manage it. If you're managing to control it with Calpol or with the ibuprofen, combination in a safe way, following the online guides, then you know what's going on. But invariably, someone will go, I'll take them in if I were you. And then what happens is you spend 4 hours at West Call picking up all sorts of bugs. Everyone's tired the next day. It's just a nightmare. So, but people go in willy-nilly. They don't use any they don't even go on the internet and check anything. There's no Google doctoring going on there. But when you go to the doctor, remember, that person's not a genius. They're not a clairvoyant. They're not a god. They're just another human being who's ahead of you on the page. Yes, they've got a lot more experience. But those basic things that you're worried about is basically, oh my God, my child's got this weird thing and they're going to die right now unless the doctor gives them this miracle cure. This is a very rare scenario, and you can afford to wait a few days and see if it gets better. But the GPs are getting bombarded with people who think they're about to die tomorrow on everything. So I would like to have that, well, you can't be so careful, cost created. I am a capitalist, though the way I talk about taxation, people would think that I'm some kind of socialist. I'm not. I think money is a great way of placing value on things, and people place absolutely no value on getting a snuffles and wandering to the doctor's surgery. So I like to reduce that by putting a value of it of £10, but it's free after that. That would be my preference, but I suspect I'm standing here on my own. So we'll find out a couple of days after the hustings on I think it's the 27th of April. Yes, on the 27th of April there is a hustings at the church on Rose Street, I think from 7 till 9:30. And at that hustings, I'm hoping that the 20 people who will be selected at random from the Wokingham electorate will be attending. And then hopefully a couple of days after that, there'll be another public meeting, which anyone can come along to and voice, but the decisions will be effectively made by those 20 people. So I think I agree with what most people probably want when it comes to the NHS, publicly owned buildings, publicly employed staff, but then when it comes down to the equipment and manufacturing, that is private innovation. But when it comes down to the free at point of care, I suspect that the people of Wokingham will side with you. I will get to state my concerns from the experiences I've had having small children grow up, that the service is abused and it's unmanageable unless people start using common sense again, and they don't. So we want to put a capital influence on that because I do believe in capitalism, but I suspect I'm on my own at that level. So anyway, we'll find out after the I suspect something like the 29th. I'm hoping to hold the public meeting there where these things will either go on the list or won't go on the list, but it will definitely be discussed as to whether or not it goes on the list.